typical day for Russian President Vladimir Putin involves ordering more drone and ground assaults on Ukraine, as Ukraine comes up with ever more inventive ways to defend against his troops. But Putin isn't dealing with a typical day. Rather than overseeing the invasion he started over 3.5 years ago and attempting to fend off Ukraine's long-range strikes in Russian territory, Putin now faces a new enemy: Mother Nature. Even nature has turned against Russia as a massive earthquake has just left a key Russian nuclear submarine base shaken to its core. At about 11:25 a.m. local time on July 30th, an enormous 8.8 magnitude earthquake struck just off Russia's eastern coast near the Kamchatka Peninsula. The Washington Post says that U.S. geological authorities are also claiming that the quake could be among the 6 strongest that have ever been recorded, and it has been sending tsunami waves far and wide. In Japan, almost 2 million people were ordered to evacuate their homes amid tsunami warnings, though those warnings have since been downgraded. And in the US, tsunami waves reached the west coast and threatened Hawaii. Alerts were also issued in China, Indonesia, New Zealand, Chile, Peru, Mexico, and the Philippines. However, happily for those nations, those warnings are all being downgraded as the worst of the earthquake seems to have passed. But there's one nation that bore the brunt of the quake's devastating power: Russia. Specifically, the earthquake struck in an area that lies just 74 miles from Vylyachinsk, which is a small town that also happens to be home to one of the most important assets in Russia's military, the Navy's main Pacific nuclear submarine base. That's according to the Kyiv Post, which reported on July 30th that Vylyachinsk is the only port in eastern Russia that's capable of enabling the deployment and maintenance of Russia's Borai-class nuclear submarines. Those submarines are a danger to the Western world. They're armed with Russia's RSM-56 Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles, which means they make up a key component of Putin's nuclear triad. Russia's leader uses these submarines to maintain Russia's nuclear deterrent in the Pacific, using them as a clear warning to other nations that Russia has unseen vessels carrying the power to destroy them at any time. Now the fate of those submarines is in doubt, as tsunami waves have rocked the one Pacific base from which they can deploy. What makes the Vylyachinsk base so important is that its submarine base includes deep water piers in which Russia's submarines can be stored, but also missile handling equipment and communications infrastructure, along with all the support systems that are needed to keep those submarines running. Russia has no alternative as far as anybody knows. No other naval base Russia maintains that points out into the Pacific has this unique combination of assets that enable nuclear submarine deployment. That means the July 30th quake presents a massive problem for Putin. We'll dig deeper into why later in the video, but for now, the obvious question has to be asked: how extensive is the damage? At the time of creating this video, the massive earthquake had occurred less than 24 hours ago. That means all assessments of the damage caused to Russia's naval assets, along with the Kamchatka Peninsula in general, are still in their early stages. However, we are starting to get early glimpses of the damage wrought by tsunami waves that are now only starting to recede. The Kyiv Post provides some basics, noting that videos are already circulating on the social media platform Telegram, depicting some of the damage caused. The Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky harbor has been hit, these videos supposedly suggest. The Kyiv Post says that if the harbor has sustained damage, it's very likely that the Vylyachinsk nuclear submarine base, which lies deeper in the bay and was closer than Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky to the earthquake's epicenter, has likely experienced equal or even greater damage. Analysts on X are also providing more direct evidence of the scale of the damage caused. The Geo Insider X account has shared 30 seconds of drone footage from the Severokurilsk port, with practically the entire video showcasing that the port is completely waterlogged. Only the tops of some buildings and harbors seem to be jutting out of the water, though we're unable to see just how much damage has been caused until the water recedes. The OSINT Technical X account also shares footage of the same port, shot from the nearby village of the same name, which shows the first of the tsunami waves the earthquake generated hitting the shoreline and starting to flood structures. Finally, the same X account posted an image several hours after the video is shared, which shows the waters starting to recede, leaving behind what appears to be damaged gates and other structures. But what of the Vylyachinsk nuclear submarine base? Russia is keeping very tight-lipped about what has or hasn't happened to that vital base. We'll discuss in a little more detail soon. The Kyiv Post says that Russia's Ministry of Defense hasn't issued an official statement discussing the base's operational status or what has happened to any of the submarines deployed at the base. However, it does seem that no casualties have been officially reported at Vylyachinsk. Of course, there's a difference between Russia's version of official and most of the rest of the world's version. It's very possible that people have died at Vylyachinsk and that some of Russia's nuclear submarines have been destroyed. The War Zone, or TWZ, has tried to look into the issue in greater detail. It points out that the main Vylyachinsk submarine port is named Rybachi, which is where Russia keeps the majority of its Borai and Borai-A class nuclear-capable submarines. These are among the newest submarines in Russia's arsenal, as proven by the fact that Putin is in the process of replacing Russia's older Delta-class subs with this new model. At least one of those older Delta-class submarines, the Ryazan, appeared to still be present at the Rybachi base on recent satellite images, though its operational status isn't known. And it's from satellite images that we may get an idea of the potential damage this earthquake has wrought on Russia's submarine fleet. On July 30th, the Tatarigami X account published a satellite photo taken 2 weeks before the earthquake struck. That photograph shows multiple submarines at the Rybachi base. The X account provides the breakdown. Satellite image taken about 2 weeks before the earthquake shows 6 nuclear submarines at Russia's base near Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, just over 100 kilometers from the quake's epicenter. The breakdown is 3 Oscar-class, 1 Akula-class, 1 Borai-class, and 1 Delta-class submarine. It also points out that the age of this image means that both the number and the composition of the subs at this vital base may have changed in the 2 weeks between when the photo was taken and when the earthquake struck. However, some were almost certainly still present before the quake. Given the shallow depth of Avacha Bay, it's likely that some submarines were relocated to deeper waters ahead of the tsunami, Tatarigami says. So some of Russia's nuclear submarines may have been damaged, but it's also just as possible that Russia moved the most valuable of those submarines into deeper waters before the tsunami waves arrived, potentially protecting them against the worst of the impact. There's also the chance that no damage occurred to Russia's key submarine base at all. TWZ stresses that there are no clear indications of any damage having occurred coming out of Russia right now. Plus, the Avacha Bay, where these key bases and ports are located, has geography that may have shielded the base from the worst that the tsunami waves had to offer. TWZ also spoke to a retired Russian Navy officer who goes by the X-handle @capt_Navy, who said, "I have no information about critical damage to the Russian Navy's naval bases in Kamchatka. I think everything is within the normal range. These bases were designed and built with the possibility of a nuclear attack by the enemy in mind. But again, this is Russia." Providing no information about things that may have harmed its ability to project power is the Kremlin's stock in trade. It's also a trait of Russian responses to disasters that military analyst Jason J. Smart notes is very common to Putin. Speaking in a YouTube video he published in the wake of the earthquake, Smart brings up an incident that occurred during the beginning of Putin's first stint as Russia's president back in 2000, the Kursk disaster. Noted by the Encyclopedia Britannica as one of the most serious naval disasters Russia has ever suffered, the Kursk incident happened over the weekend of August 12th to 13th in 2000. During a naval exercise inside the Arctic Circle, the nuclear submarine Kursk experienced some sort of problem that led to its sinking to the bottom of the Barents Sea with all 118 crew members on board. Everybody in the Oscar II-class submarine died in the disaster, as a desperate Russian rescue operation attempt saw the country fail to establish radio contact or accept help from the many nations that offered it. And it's that refusal of help that's worrying for the Russian Navy right now, as Smart points out. He said that it was possible to hear the sailors on board the ill-fated Kursk banging on the walls as their submarines sank. The US Navy could hear them banging on the walls, and the Americans offered to help. The Russians declined that help. Vladimir Putin declined that help. And incredibly enough, the Kursk sank in water that was less deep than the length of the ship. Smart's point is that the submarine crew could have been saved. However, Putin's refusal to accept help, a decision that may have been made in a desperate attempt to hide what he saw as a sign of Russian weakness, showcases the sort of man Russia's leader is, according to Smart. Putin declined that assistance, Smart says. That's the sort of cold-blooded person he is. So it's probably not surprising right now there's a significant problem that is affecting the Russian Navy in the Far East that we're hearing absolutely nothing from Moscow. When it comes to what just happened to Russia's nuclear submarine base, the point Smart is making is very clear. Putin has a track record of keeping his mouth shut and denying help when his submarine crews are in trouble. That type of decision has already led to the possibly avoidable deaths of 118 sailors back in 2000. There's a possibility that the situation in the Kamchatka Peninsula is far worse than Russia is letting on, perhaps to the point where Putin's cold-bloodedness is once again coming into play. Russia could get help if it needs it. But Putin's pride and his complete inability to let the world think for even a moment that Russia is experiencing a moment of weakness might be preventing that from happening. As a rule, when nuclear assets are somehow affected, the Kremlin is silent, Smart says. This is what they view as being strategically overexposed. They don't want people to know what's occurring, so nobody tries to take advantage of their weakness. The uncertainty that surrounds the base in the Avacha Bay is by Russian design, which makes it very hard to determine just how much damage has been done, how much danger Russia's submarine crews are in, because Russia isn't talking. What we do know is that Russia has just received a stiff hook to the jaw from Mother Nature in the form of one of the most powerful earthquakes in recorded history. And if that wasn't bad enough, that hook has been followed up by another natural punch that could floor Russia. Just a few hours after the 8.8 magnitude earthquake rocked the Kamchatka Peninsula, A huge volcano called Klyuchevskaya Sopka erupted. RBC Ukraine reported on the incident, noting that the volcano is the highest in all of Eurasia, and it's active to the point that hot lava has already started flowing down its western slope. A glow is also visible above the volcano, the outlet reports, as are explosions due to lava and ash emissions. The volcano has already emitted a 1.86-mile cloud of ash into the skies and may soon belch out more. That creates even more problems for Russia. This ash could prevent it from sending rapid aerial assistance to the Kamchatka Peninsula, especially as this volcanic activity has intensified since the massive earthquake struck. Images and a brief video shared on the RBC Ukraine Telegram channel show some of these new eruptions in action. As with the earthquake, these volcanic eruptions are part of a developing situation. It doesn't look like any ash or lava has caused issues for civilians or any of Russia's settlements in the Kamchatka Peninsula yet. But it's also hard to predict what the future may hold as Russia attempts to deal with the aftermath of a huge earthquake. Now let's come back to the earthquake and its resulting tsunami waves. We'll assume for a moment that those waves have caused more damage to Russia's nuclear submarine base and other ports in the Kamchatka Peninsula than the Kremlin is letting on. Which leads us to the important question: what could all of this mean for Russia moving forward? Honing in on Vylyachinsk for a moment, Jason J. Smart points out something that we've already mentioned. Vylyachinsk is a single point of failure for the Russian Navy. In other words, it's the only port Russia maintains in the Far East that has the facilities needed to support Russia's nuclear-capable submarines. Smart explains why that's such a massive problem. If this base were damaged by the earthquake or tsunami, he says, the fleet may be physically unable to launch from the ports or to physically return to the ports. That's an interesting point. It's easy to observe what damage to such an important base could mean in terms of Russia's ability to deploy its nuclear submarines into the Pacific. But what about the Russian Pacific Fleet assets that are already in the ocean? There's a possibility that some of Russia's submarines were preparing to return to port following their operations. They likely won't be low on fuel given that they operate using nuclear power, but they may be in states of disrepair. They may require maintenance. Even if they don't right now, extensive damage to Vylyachinsk could mean these Russian submarines aren't able to return to a safe harbor anytime soon. They'll have to remain deployed. And the longer they stay at sea, the more vulnerable these deployed submarines may become. Worse yet, remember that Vylyachinsk was also home to all of the communications and support systems upon which these submarines rely. If the docks are damaged or the sonar tracking arrays are offline, the submarines become stranded or they're just silenced, Smart says. Some of Russia's submarines in the Pacific may have already gone dark, meaning they wouldn't even be able to navigate back to Vylyachinsk, never mind any other base they might try to use as an alternative. What would happen to those submarines? We may already have the answer if the Kursk submarine situation is anything to go by. As we speak, Russia may be dealing with a naval disaster on a scale that's never been seen before, and the rest of the world simply doesn't know about it because the Kremlin isn't talking. Stranded submarines may be languishing in the Pacific, unable to communicate with their base and with no idea if help is coming or if it's even possible for Russia to send that help at all. We just don't know, and Putin isn't talking. If the earthquake and tsunamis have caused damage to such an extent, that also creates problems for Putin from a strategic perspective. Russia's Pacific Fleet is massive, and it's not just submarines that make up its numbers. As United 24 Media reported in April, the fleet consists of nearly 100 naval warships, which include everything from submarines to amphibious assault vessels. Between 2023 and 24, the outlet says, Russia supercharged its Pacific Fleet with the delivery of 7 new submarines and intended to send 3 more in the future. Russia's goal with this Pacific Fleet expansion is simple: destabilization of the Pacific region. Russia has been paying attention to Japan in particular, as that nation undergoes a major transformation in its defense policy. Since the end of World War II, Japan has taken a pacifistic approach to its defense, preferring to solve issues through diplomacy rather than its military. That approach has been changing since Putin invaded Ukraine, as Japan has been forming new military partnerships and in 2025 passed a record defense budget that will see it pour over $55 billion into its military by the end of the year. Russia's growing Pacific Fleet was intended to represent a threat to Japan. It was also a tool that Putin could use in the many territorial disputes Russia has with Japan in the Pacific. Plus, that fleet helped Russia to counter the US influence in that region, maintain a threat to the Arctic, and cause problems for South Korea, United 24 says. Now the Pacific Fleet may be in trouble, meaning that Putin has lost at least part of a deterrent he was using to keep his Pacific enemies in check. China could also become a problem, as Smart points out. And why the Russians should really be concerned is because, though what's going on right now in Vylyachinsk doesn't really affect the war in Ukraine in a very direct way, it does indirectly, Smart says. The Russians have a long-seated fear that the Chinese would one day try to take advantage of them. That time may come sooner than Putin ever anticipated if the Pacific Fleet has been crippled by an 8.8 magnitude earthquake. Speaking about deterrence, the earthquake may also have caused strategic problems for Russia from a nuclear perspective. According to the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, Russia maintains a nuclear triad, of which the naval component is extremely important. The country has 11 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines in its arsenal. We also know that based on satellite imagery, at least 2 of these submarines, one each from the Delta and Borai classes, were stationed at the Rybachi base just 2 weeks before the earthquake struck. We don't know what has happened to those submarines. They may be in danger even if they weren't directly damaged by the tsunami waves. Deployment doesn't guarantee protection, as we mentioned earlier when discussing the problems the recent earthquake may have caused for Russia's communications and supporting systems. We do know that the 11 ballistic missile submarines Russia has are capable of collectively delivering 624 nuclear warheads, according to the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. If 2 of the 11 are down, they may have taken their nuclear missiles with them. Russia will still have a powerful sea-based nuclear deterrent, but it won't be anywhere near as powerful as it was if the worst-case scenario has actually happened. And that's the caveat on which we'll leave this video. With so little information coming out of the Kremlin, it will likely take several more days for satellite imagery and drone footage to reveal the true extent of the damage that Mother Nature's strike against Russia has caused. One thing is for certain, Putin will be shaken regardless of the eventual outcome. It's not just Mother Nature that Russia has to worry about. Its own air force is starting to cause some serious problems. You can't make this up. Russia has accidentally bombed itself 100 times in 2025 alone. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show if you want more videos covering what's happening to Russia's Navy. And thank you, as always, for watching.